the Inferno. This is the most disturbing mission in the entire Ace Combat series. This mission here.
The Belkan forces are beginning to take flight. The industrial city of Hoffnung is crucial to the enemy's industrial strategy and the heart of its war productions. The Allied forces have decided that all Belkan war production must be stopped to expedite the end of the war, and has requested our participation in this operation. The operation will primarily involve the bombing of ground facilities by the Allied forces' bombers. Your mission is to support those bombers and attack enemy facilities. We have achieved near total air supremacy over the target area, but don't let your guard down. There may still be sporadic resistance.
Gone to it, all units. I've confirmed a burning city up ahead. That must mean the bombing started.
Cover the Allied bombers. Eliminate all ground and aerial threats.
Let's move. To all bombers, remove Belka's ability to counterattack. Priority is placed on destruction over accuracy. Initiate bombing sequence. Drop them all. Turn it to ashes. That's not enough. Drop more bombs. I thought they were on a precision bombing mission. They're just tossing bombs all over the place. Something strange is going on down there. The number of burning areas just suddenly increased. A tomahawk just hit the city. Are those guys serious? A bomb has hit Sector C! It's gonna south of fuel! Inform all units. This is an order from Operation HQ. Abandon Hoffnung. However, do not retreat until all facilities are destroyed. Leave them nothing. That is all. Burn down the entire city. Set fire to the buildings on your way out. This is a weapons factory. What are you doing? Get out of Hoffnung. We don't have anything more to do here. Hoffnung has fallen to the Allied forces. Even the Hoffnung is falling. What has become of our mighty Air Force? I've been hit. The power's out. I'm going down. Johan, make some space on the truck bed. How am I supposed to do that? We're carrying a wounded soldier. So this is the price we pay for losing. Someone's been pushed their way into Belkan territory. The flames are spreading. Belka City's gonna burn to the ground.
All facilities in the main sector have been destroyed. Damn those Allied forces!
Release all bombs before you get shot down. This can't go on any longer. I have to stop these bombings. Move to the left and drop the payload. I've taken a direct hit. I can't hold up. The city's going up in flames. Learn to accept it, kid. This is war. You expect me to believe that arson and indiscriminate bombing is war? There's no mercy in war. It's a collision of powers. Even war has a set of rules to follow. Burn them to the ground.
Nobody knew why they were fighting anymore. All I felt at that point was sadness for the world. That's why I...
Okay, so I wanted to talk about the Inferno here. The Inferno is Ace Combat's most disturbing mission. And it's probably one of the most memorable missions in the series, but what a lot of people don't know is that the Inferno is actually based on a real-life operation. It's based on a real-life thing that ended up happening. It's extremely disturbing. So what happened? This happened in February 1945. This happened in the last few weeks of World War II in Europe. What was happening at this point, I'll show a map on the screen. Nazi Germany was being boxed in. Their defeat was inevitable. What ended up happening is the US had pretty much taken all of France by February 1945. They were actually pushing into Western Germany since October 1944 as well. There were still some holdouts left in France, but the United States had pretty much taken most of France at this point. And the US had also taken most of Italy, and with only parts of northern Italy and the mountains still remaining under partial Axis control. As for the eastern side of Germany, you had East Prussia, which was almost all taken by the Soviets, and then you had the Soviets that were pushing into Germany's eastern borders. Germany was screwed. They were going to lose this war, and also Germany had pretty much lost air supremacy. What air supremacy means is that you control the skies, so they had lost it. They were running out of fuel, their air force was shelled their former self, a lot of their planes had been shot down or grounded. They basically had no chance, but the Nazi leadership refused to surrender. They were going to fight till the very last man. You know, Hitler would not give up. Now, in the Ace Combat world, Belka is actually based heavily on Nazi Germany, so the Balkan War is heavily based on that, because in the Ace Combat world is that Belka, their economy ended up collapsing, and after their economy ended up collapsing, you had a fascist political party that ended up coming to power, and then the new ultranationalist government of Belka started making land claims to all of their neighbors, and invaded all of their neighbors, extremely similar to, you know, World War II, and Belka's cities also have very German-like names. Which is more proof that Belka is also based on Nazi Germany, and also the coalition that ended up fighting against Belka in the Ace Combat world is called the Allies, similar to real life where they were called the Allies in World War II.
The roots of the war lie in the Balkan Federal Law Review that took place in 1988. Belka, suffering from economic strife, permitted its eastern territory to secede, and the Republic of Ustio was born. But Belka's economic troubles did not subside. Meanwhile, taking advantage of the situation, the world's superpower Osea continued to flourish. Amidst the economic panic, an extreme right-wing party took power within Belka, aiming to restore strength and stability to the nation. And on March 25th, 1995, with the discovery of natural resources in Ustio, Belka began to invade its neighbors. It was the beginning of the Balkan War. Unprepared, each country fell quickly before the might of the legendary Balkan Air Force. In just a few days, they occupied all territories except for the mountain range. In response, the occupied Ustio government military placed all their hopes on a joint operation between Osea and the foreign mercenary forces.
So anyways, back to what the Inferno is based on. The Inferno is based on the bombing of Dresden. Now, the bombing of Dresden, this was a eastern German city, and Dresden was largely untouched by the war at this point. So largely it had not been bombed, and because of this, what ended up happening was a lot of refugees ended up going to the city. They didn't think that the city was going to get hit. Now, the British and the Americans had actually planned an operation to bomb the city. Now, the main target in Dresden was to target the rail hub. So there are people out there that say that Dresden was a civilian city and it had no military targets. That's not entirely true. There was very much military targets in Dresden. The unfortunate thing about that is that they did not hit the military targets as much as they actually should have, but there was very much military targets. So the military targets that were in Dresden was the rail hub. Dresden had a very big rail hub, and this rail hub was being used to basically transport German soldiers desperately to the Eastern Front to stop the Soviet advance on Germany's eastern border. So Germany was transporting thousands of troops through this rail hub. So that was very much a legitimate target. Targeting the rail hub was very much a legit target. But the thing about this is that when the operation was being planned, because it was a joint British and American operation, they had planned to also bomb the city center itself, residential areas directly. Now, the British and American doctrines were very different. The British doctrine, they wanted to bomb at night. And the reason they wanted to bomb at night was so that AA, flak, anti-air fire, could not see their bombers as easily. But the disadvantage of that is that you can't see your target as easily as well. The Americans wanted to bomb in daytime for precision bombing, and that was so that they could directly see their target. But the disadvantage of that is that you're exposed to fighters, and you're also exposed to AA at that point. But so what ended up happening is that the British were the ones who first attacked, and they attacked on February 13, 1945 at 10 p.m. And what ended up happening is over 200 Royal Air Force British bombers ended up coming into Dresden. And these bombers were mostly carrying HE. Some of them carried incendiary, but the first wave, it was mostly HE. HE is high explosive. The whole purpose of that first wave was to basically drop bombs on the city, and it was to create holes in the roofs, and it was also shatter the windows of a lot of the buildings, so basically to leave these buildings exposed. And how you have it in Ace Combat, where they say basically like, drop bombs, and then, drop bombs all over the place, we're prioritizing destruction over accuracy. Very similar to what ended up happening with Dresden. And this first wave that came in did not kill that many people, because when the air raid sirens came in, most people in Dresden actually ran into the air shelters, and so for the most part that first wave did not end up killing a lot of people. Now, after that wave was done, remember this was 10 o'clock at night on February 13, most people had left the air raid shelters after that first wave had left. They thought that it was over, and they left the air raid shelters to help people that were trapped in the rubble, and to check the damages to their buildings and see basically what was going on. Now, 3 hours later after that, you had the second wave come in, which was the really devastating wave. And where the first wave was over 200 Royal Air Force bombers, this one was over 500 Royal Air Force bombers. And most people did not expect that second wave to come in 3 hours later. They thought that that was over for the day. They didn't think that they were going to come back, but they came back. The second wave was carrying mostly incendiary bombs. These are fire bombs. So when these bombs detonate, they create giant fires. And because they created those holes in those roofs and the windows were shattered, this created the perfect conditions for spreading fire. And those British bombers had dropped those incendiary bombs directly on the city center and had created fires that went basically all over the city. And the really messed up thing about this is that the refugees, they were running right back towards the air raid shelters. When they ran towards the air raid shelters, that actually ended up killing them. And the reason it killed them was because when people took cover in basements and they took cover in air raid shelters to get away from the bombs and the fires, the incendiary bombs still got them, because even if the fire did not spread to the inside of the air raid shelter, because the fire was just trapping so much oxygen, people ended up dying from carbon monoxide poisoning. So they went into the air raid shelters thinking that they were safe, and they would actually suffocate. And they couldn't go outside either, because they would burn to death, or they would stay inside and they would suffocate to death. It is extremely disturbing. You had thousands of people that ended up dying. The city was just burning to the ground. Over 50% of residential areas in the city were burnt. You can just see the damages from it. And there's much more disturbing images, but I don't want to show them, and I don't think I can even show them on YouTube, but I've seen some pretty messed up images of the dead in that, and it was just really, really bad. But here's the thing. The operation did not end at that point. The operation still kept going. Now, the operation ended up happening in later in that day. So later in that day, February 14th, in midday, over 300 American bombers came in. And these American bombers that came in, the fires were still ravaging the city. And this is, 10 hours after the initial attack. So the fires were still all over the city in the daytime. And because of all the fires, the American bombers, a lot of them could not see their targets. They could not see the rail hub. So ironically, this ended up making it harder for them to also see the rail hub. Now, the American bombers, their primary target was the rail hub, but some of them, yes, did carry incendiary bombs, and some of them also did end up bombing the city center, which ended up killing a lot of civilians. The majority of the civilians ended up dying from the British in that operation, but yes, the Americans were also responsible for partially of the civilians. And then what ended up happening is a day after that, one day after that, and this happened in midday, you had over 200 American bombers that came in and they targeted the rail hub again. But here's the thing. Even though the rail hub was the main target of the operation in Dresden, the rail hub actually suffered some of the least amounts of damage. Now, was the rail hub knocked out? Yes, temporarily. It did receive damage. Tracks were blown up, buildings were destroyed. But here's the thing. The Germans were masters at building rail. And within just a couple days, or a week or two, they ended up repairing the entire rail, and the rail was operational and good to go again. And so this is why the bombing of Dresden is so controversial. When you hear about, bad things that the Allies are accused of during World War II, Dresden is one of the things that ends up coming up. And the reason that it's such a controversial operation is because there's a huge debate among historians. Like, historians don't have a concrete answer. Like, most historians debate on whether this operation was necessary, whether it was needed, because it was led to such a huge loss of civilian life. So many civilians ended up dying from this. Now, when this first happened, when the bombing of Dresden happened, the Nazis used this as propaganda. You have Joseph Goebbels, who was the Nazi minister of propaganda. What he did was he said that over 250,000 civilians had died, and he even started saying that it was over 500,000 civilians. And he was basically saying that the Americans and the British had specifically targeted civilians. Now that number was way too high. It was not that. The Nazis were just inflating the numbers for pure propaganda. But the problem with this is that we did not know the true victims, how many people ended up dying in the bombing of Dresden, until only within the last 16 years. So in 2000, most people believe that it was somewhere around 200,000 people that died, but then in 2010, there was actually an independent investigation done in Germany to find out exactly how many people died in Dresden, and the actual number was around over 25,000 people. Over 25,000 people died. It was not 250,000 people, but it was still a tremendous loss of civilian life, and it was just, the debate is, was it really necessary to target the residential areas? Was that really necessary? That's what the debate was. So there's some people that say that it was some people say that it was necessary, other people say that it wasn't. You had Sir Arthur Harris, who was the marshal of the commander that was in charge of the bombing campaign during in Britain. He was the Air Marshal of Britain. I think that's what his rank was. But he said in his quote, he said, "The Nazis entered this war under the rather childish delusion that they were going to bomb everyone else and nobody was going to bomb them. At Rotterdam, London, Warsaw, and half 100 other places, they put their rather naive theory into operation. They sowed the wind, and now they are going to reap the whirlwind." Now, about this, is that you have to also take a look at the British perspective on this, because the British perspective, you had the Blitz, and the Blitz, what that was, is it was Nazi Germany that was coming into, flying into Britain early in the war and just bombing British cities, mostly London. And you had over 40,000 civilians that died in that. So more people died in that than in the bombing of Dresden. And on top of that, what you also had is near the end of the war, the Nazis had developed a terror weapon. And the terror weapon that they developed was the V2 rocket. What a lot of people don't know about the V2 rocket is that the V2 rocket was specifically designed to target civilians. A lot of people don't know that. It was a terror weapon. So people think that it was a military weapon, but it was specifically designed to target civilians. The reason it was meant to target civilians is because it's not, you don't, V2 rockets, you are not going to have that much precision aim to hit the militaries, because militaries, enemy soldiers are always constantly on the move. Cities are staying in place. And so the purpose of the V2 rockets, it was basically to target cities and just obliterate them and kill as many civilians as possible. It was basically to pummel the Allies into submission. That was the whole purpose of it. And the idea was that if the Nazis had fired enough V2 rockets, that the Allies would eventually negotiate with them and on favorable terms towards them. That is what the Nazis were hoping for, that they kill enough civilians with these V2 rockets that the Allies are going to negotiate with them, because Germany in 1944 and 1945 did not have the resources to, take back a lot of the lands that they had originally ended up claiming. So now going back to this with the British, when you look at the British perspective, and I'm not saying that it was right, targeting the residential areas, but if you look at the British perspective, the bombers that were involved in that, they would basically be saying, the Nazis targeted our country with V2 rockets. They killed, thousands of our civilians. They targeted us in the Blitz. They killed thousands of our people. We're gonna bomb their city right now. We're gonna kill thousands of them. That's how the British bombers fought. They basically fought, they targeted our country. We're gonna target their country right now and just kill thousands of their civilians. Now, the thing about that is that two wrongs don't necessarily make a right. But what Ace Combat is trying to show you with the Inferno, because the Inferno is such a disturbing mission, is that what they're not the developers of the game aren't telling you that Belka are innocent. They're not telling you that Belka are the good guys. Belka are very much the bad guys. They're the ones who started the stupid war in the Ace Combat series, similar to how Germany were the ones who started World War II. They were the ones that started the stupid war. They were the aggressors. But what the developers are trying to tell you is that they're trying to tell you that in warfare, people lose their humanity, because the whole message of Ace Combat is that it's an anti-war game, and the developers are specifically trying to tell you that people lose their humanity in war. People don't think rationally, and people just think this hatred that people have in their hearts. And just like you had when the Allied pilots, when they were bombing Hoffnung in in Ace Combat, they were bombing Hoffnung, and they were saying that, they bombed our country, they bombed Ustio. Because that was, Ustio was a country that was victimized by Belka. They bombed our cities, they bombed Directus, our capital, now we're gonna bomb their city. And so that's how the Ustian pilots were thinking. It's to show you this anti-war message that even, the good guys, a lot of times they don't think rationally. And in war, there's just all of these bad things that ended up happening. People lose their humanity, they have this burning hatred in their hearts, and they end up doing stuff like this, and stuff like this ends up happening. Now, going back to the bombing of Dresden, is there really any proof that the bombing of Dresden had significantly shortened the war? From everything that I've said, everything that I've read, and I've read a lot about it, there really isn't proof that the bombing of Dresden really helped to shorten the war. All it really did was it just caused more human suffering. Now, maybe you could make the argument that maybe the bombing of Dresden helped shorten the war, but maybe a couple days at most, because that rail hub was out of service for a couple days. But then you also have 25,000 civilian casualties, and you ask, was that really worth it? Was that worth it? Now, was the bombing of Dresden a war crime? In my opinion, everything that I've read about it, yeah, I would say so. It probably was a war crime. Targeting the rail hub was not a war crime. I would not say that. Targeting the rail hub was very much a legitimate target. And maybe that first wave of dropping the HE bombs over the city, maybe that wasn't a war crime. But then the second wave, dropping all those incendiary bombs, on the city, I don't think that was necessary. I don't think that was needed. I don't think that it was very much. And all it did was it just gave the Nazis more propaganda. You had an entire city that was basically obliterated. It was just not a good thing at all. But what I will say ultimately about this also is that there's this situation gets even more sad because you have a lot of Holocaust deniers. What they will do is they will constantly bring up the bombing of Dresden. Have you ever noticed that the Holocaust deniers, they always bring up the bombing of Dresden? And whenever you look up like World War II like documentaries and you look up World War II videos on YouTube and it talks about Germany bombing several Allied cities, there's always some stupid neo-Nazi idiot that's in the comments that is basically saying, oh, what about Dresden? What about this? What about that? There's people that always like leave comments like that. I've seen so many comments of this on YouTube, people just leaving these comments. And the reason that neo-Nazis constantly bring up the bombing of Dresden, the reason that Holocaust deniers constantly bring this up, is because what they are doing is they're doing whataboutism. Whataboutism is basically a way to shift the argument away into talking about something completely irrelevant. They're, well, what about this? What about that? And what they are trying to do is they are trying to basically portray Germany as a victim in World War II. That is what they are trying to do. They're trying to say, oh, Germany wasn't as bad as you're making it out to be. It was, they're a victim too. You see what the Allies did. So while what happened at Dresden might have been considered a war crime, it very much might have been, this doesn't mean that Germany was less worse or that Germany was innocent in what they had done. Germany had killed millions of people. It started World War II. How many people did they kill in all of the countries that they invaded? And on top of that, you also have, there are several cities that Germany bombed that was much worse than what happened at Dresden. Much, much worse. For example, you have Warsaw, which is the capital of my parents' country, Poland. My parents are originally from Poland, and you had the Warsaw Uprising. The Warsaw Uprising started in August of 1945. The city rebelled against the Nazis. They were trying to take control of the city as the Soviets were approaching. And by October, the Warsaw Uprising had failed, and it had failed because the Soviets were actually blocking American and British planes from refueling at their airfields to dropping supplies. The Soviets actually did not want the Warsaw Uprising to succeed because they did not want an independent Polish government. They wanted to basically, they were thinking that they were going to use the Polish resistance to weaken the Nazis, and even though the Polish were begging the Soviets for help, they didn't end up helping them. And the Nazis ended up winning by October 1944, and Hitler was so angry about the Warsaw Uprising that what he did was he had ordered the entire city of Warsaw to be burnt to the ground, to destroyed. And so you had German demolition teams that were blowing up each block by block, and then you had German flamethrower teams that were going block by block, burning people in their buildings. There's pictures of these German flamethrower teams going around burning the city. And even if you ever watch the movie The Pianist shows a pretty good depiction of this, of the destruction of Warsaw, where these German flamethrower teams were going around burning the city. And here's the thing, Dresden, 50% of Dresden's residential buildings were destroyed, which is awful, and 25,000 people died. But in Warsaw, between 90 to 95% of the entire city was destroyed. And you had over 200,000 people that died in that. 200,000 civilians, where you had 25,000 civilians that died in the bombing of Dresden. So the Nazis killed 8 times more civilians with the destruction of Warsaw. So the Nazis had done much worse to other cities. And Warsaw is just one example. You had Leningrad, for example. You had Stalingrad also, where you had massive civilian casualties on Nazis had been bombing these cities. So the point that I'm getting at right here is that when you have these stupid Holocaust deniers that will just constantly bring up the bombing of Dresden and they'll talk about it endlessly. What about this? What about Dresden? What they're doing is they're basically trying to minimize Germany's crimes in World War II, and they're trying to portray Germany as like a victim, and they're trying to make it seem like the Allies were the aggressors. So what happened with Dresden was horrible, and you could definitely argue that it was a war crime. You definitely could. So I'm not defending Germany in this regard. Germany were the ones who started this stupid war. But the thing I'm saying is that was it really necessary to bomb the city center like that with what happened? 25,000 civilians burning to death. And I've seen the pictures of what Dresden, some of the bodies in Dresden and some of that stuff. That is extremely disturbing, and it was really messed up. And it was, you could definitely make the argument that it was a war crime. But at the same time, too, is you have these idiots that will just constantly deny the Holocaust, and what they will do is they will basically just use Dresden as a as a whataboutism argument to basically try to deflect from Germany's war crimes. So was the bombing of Dresden wrong? Yeah, most likely it was. It's still debated among historians. For my opinion, I think it was wrong. I think it was a war crime. But that doesn't mean that Germany was innocent or that Germany hadn't done any bad things. But that's what it is. That's the message that Ace Combat is also trying to tell you. Is Ace Combat isn't saying that Belka is innocent. It's not saying that Belka was a wrong party. Was basically just telling you is that in war, bad things happen. The core message of the game is anti-war, so while the Belkans are the bad guys, they're the ones who started this war, it's just going to show you that this, the burning hatred that people have in their hearts, this hatred, people aren't thinking rationally, and bad things end up happening like this. Civilians end up intentionally getting targeted when you have things like in war. And in the game, you can also target your mercenary, which you're making money. You can target, fuel depots and stuff like that, which normally would be legitimate targets. But in this case, is the difference between the bombing of Dresden and the attack on Hoffnung is that Hoffnung is right about to be taken by the Allies. So like the Allies are right outside. Well, the Allies weren't right outside Dresden; they were just bombing it. And so destroying like the fuel depots is just going to cause the fire to spread more across Hoffnung. And on top of that, what it's going to do is it's going to deny those people those supplies. And you can like blow up cars that are fleeing, planes, civilian planes are flying away. You get paid more money for that. It is meant to capture that anti-war message. And the last thing that I'll say about this, and this is what makes the Inferno such a disturbing mission, because it shows you that even in a lot of war games, you're always on the extremely heroic side. You're always fighting against the enemies, which are clearly like cartoon villains. But it's showing you that even the enemy that you're fighting against, they're still people, and there's still civilians down there. And it's basically showing you the atrocities that can happen during war, even when you're fighting against an evil enemy like Belka. But Hoffnung, the city of Hoffnung in German translates to hope. And so when they say this in the game,
Inform all units. This is an order from Operation HQ. Abandon Hoffnung. However, do not retreat until all facilities are destroyed. Leave them nothing. That is all.
when they say abandon Hoffnung, what they are really saying is abandon hope, and that's what makes the mission just so disturbing.